I paused that last video too early. We still had things to talk about regarding World War I, and I don't want to go back and record it. So we're going to talk about another way in which World War I and the impact of war helped lead to the rise of the Nazis. And that would be the way in which the World War I led to the Russian Revolution / Russian Civil War, both of which were wars themselves that helped impact the rise of the Nazis in Germany thousands of kilometers away. So, 1917, there was a revolution in which the Tsar was overthrown. Long story short, Russia goes from being a Tsarist monarchy to a communist, well, Russia plus many others becomes the Soviet Union, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, a communist country. Many people will flee from Russia and the other Soviet republics that are lumped into the USSR because they are not wanting to be part of this new communist dictatorship. These people will be called white emigres. The white is coming from the fact that in the Russian Civil War, you had two sides, the reds and the whites. The reds were the Bolsheviks, the communists. The whites were the monarchists and everyone else trying to fight against the communists. When the whites lost, many of them fled Russia and many of them ended up in Germany. As you might imagine, as people fleeing from a communist country, they were very anti communist. And many of these people were also very anti Semitic. Many of them would explicitly link communism to Judaism and would have a pretty robust philosophy or ideology linking the two, coming up with this idea, this Judeo Bolshevism that you'll hear about a lot especially in Nazi Germany. The arrival of these white emigres is going to spark fear of communism in many, many countries, especially Germany. Many people will hear the stories of violence, of the seizure of private property, of oppression that these people are bringing with them, and they will be terrified of that happening in their own country. No one thought a communist revolution was going to happen in Russia. Karl Marx himself thought it was going to start, communism would start in a country like Germany, or, well, Germany wasn't a country at that point, but in a place like Germany or a country like Great Britain that was much more industrialized. So there was this idea that if it could happen in Germany, or I'm sorry, if it could happen in Russia, it could happen in anywhere. And so many, many people were very deeply afraid of communism as the result of the Russian Civil War, sending white emigres to Germany. Hitler will very effectively exploit the fear of communism. In fact, the last triggering event that convinces President Hindenburg to appoint Hitler chancellor, spoiler alert, is going to be the November 1932 election, in which the Communist Party of Germany sees an increase in electoral support. And he realizes he has to do something. He has to put someone in power who can effectively stop the communists from taking control. No one else was effectively doing it. His last option was Hitler. This will also impact the rise of the Third Reich, because the white emigres themselves will help shape Hitler's ideology. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that Hitler becomes much more strongly anti Semitic once he meets white emigres and gets introduced to their ideology very early in the 1920s. And in fact, many of the earliest leaders of the Nazi Party were themselves white emigres whose fear of communists translated into support for National Socialism. Lastly, we have the way in which the Treaty of Versailles just impacted the German people on an economic level. As an activity, I would like you to try to identify the message of this cartoon. Try to find two separate points in this cartoon. Write them down, come to me, and I will check for understanding. Sorry, I keep jumping the gun here. The actual last way in which World War I will impact the rise of the Nazis is with the creation of German paramilitary groups, especially paramilitary groups that support the Nazis. Remember, one of the aspects of the Treaty of Versailles was that the German army could only have 100,000 men. This will lead to millions of soldiers no longer having a job, because the German army had millions more people in it than just 100,000. You have these veterans being very angry about losing the war, no longer having a job, being displaced, unemployed, and many of these displaced soldiers are going to go on to join conservative paramilitary groups. And one of the largest of these groups was the Free Corps, a very conservative group that was often actually used by the government itself to help put down leftist uprisings or just to fight leftist groups in the streets. I mentioned the Freikorps because many of them would then go on to join Hitler's Storm Patrol, the Sturmabteilung, SA for short. These are his brown shirts. And they would go from being part of the Free Corps that was more associated with the government to being the paramilitary group specifically dedicated to the Nazis. In fact, Ernst Röhm, the leader, the founder of the SA, was previously a leader in the Freikorps before he went to go work for the Nazis. Um, so all of these displaced soldiers kind of joined up with these paramilitary groups, resulting in a lot of street violence, fighting in the streets, and Hitler would exploit this for his own political gain, not in the least by promising to restore order, exploiting people's fears of street gang violence and saying, don't worry, I've got this, I'll take care of it, even though it's kind of his people who were also responsible.